We can hear
All
you.
right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the introduction once again. I'm John Morganelli, a former Ivy League Director of Admissions from Cornell University, founder of Ivy League Admissions LLC, and author of Growing Ivy, How to Crack the Code on Elite College Admissions. I've broken the presentation into 4 sections. First, we're going to examine whether the Asian bias exists and how it actually impacts applicants. Second, we're going to examine the specific aspects of the application review process that often negatively impact Asian applicants. Third, we will explore why identifying the student's academic direction is so important in this process. And fourth, we will investigate exactly what the top schools in the country actually want, and a hint, its contribution, and we're going to talk about that in more detail shortly. Before we jump into college admissions, I want to take a moment to describe why I believe I'm one of the more qualified people in the United States to talk about college admissions. I've served as a senior admissions officer at 3 different US universities. I've personally been responsible for over 30,000 applications for admission. I was asked by the University of Pennsylvania's Dean of Admissions to review their application review criteria before they rolled it out to their admissions readers. I was fortunate that in my role as Director of Admissions at Cornell University's College of Arts and Sciences, I had the opportunity to play host to the Ivy Plus conference in Ithaca, New York. For those of you who do not know what the Ivy Plus group is, it is every Ivy League school, plus Stanford, MIT, and Duke. Every 2 years, the deans and directors from every single one of those schools gets together for an Ivy Plus enrollment summit where we discuss everything related to college admissions. Of course, that provided invaluable insight into literally most of all the selective schools in the country. And finally, when I was appointed the Director of Admissions, I was 32 years old, by far the youngest in the Ivy League. I've managed a process of over 20,000 applications for admission each year at Cornell. I supervised a staff comprised of PhD level faculty, and I hired and trained over 40 application readers per year. The reason I share this experience is that I want you to know that my perspective is grounded in actual experience. I'm not guessing, I've been there. That said, we're going to cover some tough topics today as it relates to how being Asian impacts being an applicant at highly selective colleges and universities. Please know I'm bringing forward data and information to illustrate real challenges. I believe that if we know the challenge, we will be better prepared to successfully meet that challenge. Finally, I truly want this presentation to provide real actionable ideas about how to give yourself the absolute best chance of earning an offer of admission. But for real, folks, if you want to do this right, you have to understand how colleges and universities work and how that impacts the way they make decisions. For people unfamiliar with this topic, it can be complex. This presentation was originally subtitled Turning Obstacles into Opportunities. You may have noticed that on the opening slide, I retitled it, A Master's Class in College Admissions, because that's kind of what this is. I think you will find that almost no other consultants share this type of information. They hold back information because they don't want to run out of suggestions. I am holding nothing back. I want you to know the plan. I want you to know how to implement that plan. If I have clients in the audience this evening, I'm very confident that no matter how many questions I answer, our clients still have a significant advantage because plans and stories are personal. As they say, the devil is in the details. It's all about implementation. Since time is limited, sometimes I do not provide a topic as much depth as it might deserve. If I move too quickly over a certain aspect, please jot down your question and I will try to answer it during the Q&A. Okay, let's get started. Part 1, is there a bias against Asian students? We often hear about quotas, but I would argue that it is impossible to determine if a quota actually exists. Universities know that quotas are not legal as such. They don't have quotas. They have what they refer to as a general awareness about how many of each cohort, right? Cohort being just a fancy name for a smaller group of similar students, like Asian students or pre-med students. They have a general awareness of how many of each cohort were taken last year. I think we need to shift the conversation away from quotas, which as noted are literally impossible to prove, toward an inherent reader bias. A quick glance at the chart illustrates that a significant majority of the American public have negative views of China. And I think that we see this unfortunate fact manifested in the way admissions officers read Asian applications for admission. This chart was taken directly from the lawsuit against Harvard, which claimed that Harvard discriminated against Asian applicants. And what we find from the most selective school in the country is that Asian applicants earn the lowest scores by a rather large margin in the personal ratings category. But well before this chart was made public, I observed this unfortunate fact throughout my career in highly selective college admissions. Again, this specific data was taken directly from the Harvard lawsuit. So let's take a moment to examine it in a bit more depth. What does it mean when you actually break it down? If we only used grades and test scores, including AP scores, Asian students would represent 43% of the incoming class at Harvard, represented by Model 1 under the academics only column. When we throw in extracurricular and personal aspects, that percentage of the class drops to 26%, represented by Model 3 under the extracurricular and personal column. That means that 17% of the spaces at Harvard are lost because the applicant failed to demonstrate desirable personal qualities through thoughtfully conceived extracurricular activities. This has nothing to do with the fact that the applicant is Asian. As you may notice, I'm not even mentioning Model 4, which takes demographics of being Asian into account. I'm focused on the 17%, the difference between the 43% noted in Model 1 column and the 26% noted in Model 3 column. This 17% represents students who should have been admitted based on academic ability, had they demonstrated desirable personal qualities through thoughtfully conceived extracurricular activities. As noted, this is straight from the data at Harvard, and I can confirm I've witnessed this throughout my 10+ years in college admissions. Asian students often focus their application on qualities and engagement experiences that are not valued at top-tier US universities. This is our mountain, right? This is our challenge. Okay, now that we understand the challenge, we will move on to part 2 of the presentation, the review process. But before we jump into how to build an application, I want to take a moment to speak broadly about some of the very common mistakes I see amongst Asian applicants. I've broken them into 2 categories. They are the qualities Asian applicants focus on and the way Asian applicants spend their time and their energy. Take note of the 3 qualities listed on the left-hand side of the slide: hard work, dedication, and organization. Elite universities do not want students who are quote unquote working hard. They want students who barely notice that they're working hard because they're having so much fun exploring. Dedication and organization, these are qualities that can be inferred from the output of the success. If the student is successful, the college admissions office will assume he or she is dedicated or organized enough to be successful. The admissions offices want to know about qualities like curiosity, exploration, and contribution. They want to know that students are interested enough about the world around them to actually ask some questions. They want to know that the students are motivated enough to actually get up and explore those questions. And they want to know that the potential applicants seek to make some level of contribution to the community through those endeavors. Parents, remember this because you will be asked to complete brag sheets, identifying the qualities that represent your children for the teachers and the guidance counselors who will serve as recommenders. And many of the teachers and counselors will literally use exactly what is provided on that document. Brag sheets are a huge opportunity to provide the application direction and focus on the qualities that are valued. Don't miss that opportunity. Next, we will look at time and energy. What we find is that Asian students often spend a lot of time in things like musical engagement, athletic engagement, artistic engagement, or traditional volunteerism, like working at a soup kitchen or a retirement home. To be clear, in 99% of instances, regardless of what you have heard or seen elsewhere, these things will not have a major impact on admissions decisions. Unless the student plans to be a music major, play a sport, or be an art major, those activities have almost no impact on decision making. Does that mean they're bad? No, of course not. Some of those activities may enhance your ability to be successful in other really important areas, but the engagement itself is likely to have little or no impact on an admissions decision. I always ask my clients, do you love it? If you love it, regardless of whether it helps you get into college, you should do it. But if you don't love it, and it's not furthering your goal of getting to the types of universities you're looking for, then you may at least want to consider how much time and energy is being invested. I want to start the application review section by discussing the aspects of the application that really impact decision-making. I want to walk through the different parts of the application and point out areas where I typically see mostly Asian students negatively impacted in the review process. First, the standardized test. This is always the first thing people think about as it relates to why it is harder for Asian students. And it's true, Asian students score higher than every other ethnicity on the SAT and the ACT. Thus, Asian students with test scores below the top 50% of whatever school they're applying to very likely will be filtered out of the review process and thus rejected. Moving from standardized tests to curriculum, what we find as it relates to unsupported curriculum is that Asian students applying to humanities or social science majors, and they apply to those areas often because they think it's easier to get in. And in some instances, it is easier to get in. But what we find is they're applying to those majors with elective courses in STEM areas. That inconsistency in the application will very likely lead to a rejection. Then we move on to academic rigor, right? Did the student challenge themselves in high school as it relates to their curriculum? And what we find with Asian students is oftentimes, if they're interested in clear STEM areas, which many Asian students are, and they apply to an area like computer science or engineering, they may be applying with what is a reasonable math sequence, but it's not the top math sequence at their high school. So for example, they're in Calc AB, maybe even Calc BC as a senior, but the high school is offering multivariable or differential equations. And if other Asian students from your high school are in those courses, which oftentimes they are, that can lead to a rejection. Then we move to in-school extracurricular activities. In many instances, I find Asian students may ignore these activities altogether, or they say that they want to study history, again, maybe because they like history, or they think it might be a little bit easier to get in, but they're part of the computer science coding club, or they're part of the robotics club. If you want to identify yourself as a history major and you're in the computer science coding club and the robotics club, that very likely would end up in a rejection. Then we move to out-of-school extracurricular activities. And what we find is that Asian students often fail to develop a consistent theme amongst your out-of-school extracurricular activities. These out-of-school extracurricular activities are important to illustrate progress and building upon experiences from in school, maybe even from out of school. They're building blocks. And we need to illustrate growth and progression through out-of-school extracurricular activities. A lot of times, there's a lot of scattered engagement for our Asian students, and so that inconsistency likely can lead to a rejection. And then we think about outside of school programs and courses, right? These are your college courses, your summer programs. And what I find is that Asian students oftentimes will focus on finding what they consider to be high prestige programs. Penn comes to mind because a lot of students seem to be interested in the Penn summer programs. And I think the reason the students are interested in the high prestige summer programs is that they believe that if they apply to a school that maybe is a little less selective than, say, Penn, where they went for their summer program, that the admissions office will read it and say, wow, look, they went to Penn during the summer. The student must be quite impressive. And that's just really not the way it functionally works. Most summer programs are revenue generators, right? They're built to generate revenue for the college or university, even the selective ones. And so I would argue that prestigious summer programs or courses are really not very important. What's important is that the summer program or course clearly connects to the area of academic interest the student's identifying when they're applying to college. And oftentimes I'll see Asian students kind of forego a less select or a very clear connective program that might be a little less selective for a more prestigious program that clearly doesn't really connect to what they want to do. And then the last part is research and community exploration, where what I find is that Asian students may engage in what they refer to as accessible research opportunities, right? So if I start to reach out to a bunch of faculty members and only certain ones respond to me, well, then that's the accessible research opportunity, and that gets thrown into the application as part of the story. But that research project, that research question needs to be very clearly connected to the area of academic interest noted in the application. If not, that inconsistency again will likely lead to a rejection. Okay, assuming all of the previously noted areas of the application, the kind of the pieces I just went through are, and I'll use the term fine, right? They're okay, meaning all of the subtle differences are understood and considered, and there are no red flags. Then we get to the actual admissions selection committee conversations. Does that make sense? All of the other stuff, the rigor, the appropriate curriculum, the SATs, the appropriate extracurriculars, those are bars of entry. Applicants generally must have these things to even be considered. After that is when the decisions hang in the balance. If we want to know how to get into the best schools in the country, we simply need to look at what they're asking of their applicants. So what are the top 50 schools asking about? Almost every highly selective college asks the same thing. They fundamentally, when you submit one application, right? When you submit an application to a college, you may submit one application with one essay. That's your common application personal statement. But most of the top 50 schools are asking for supplemental essay responses. And it's very helpful to look ahead to find out what you will need to respond to in the future. And as I noted, what we find is they're all asking basically the same thing. They're asking, what do you want to study? Why do you want to study it? How have you explored it? And what might you contribute to this space at this particular college or university? If you look at the example questions noted on the slide, what academic areas most pique your curiosity? And how do the programs at Princeton suit your particular interests? What field of study at MIT appeals to you? And why does this field appeal to you? How did you discover your intellectual and academic interests, and how will you explore them at Penn? As noted in the upper portion of the slide, they may phrase them a bit differently. Some of them are phrased as explain your academic interest questions. Some of them are explain why the school questions. Some of them are the what do you hope to accomplish using this education question. But fundamentally, they're all asking the same thing. They want to know what you want to study. They want to know how you explored it. And they want to know why you need this specific experience in order to further that exploration. For most young students, one of the hardest parts is simply identifying what they may be interested in. In my experience, it all starts with making students aware of what's happening in the world around them and how that may connect to areas of academia. For example, I run into students daily that are interested in Bitcoin. Now, is Bitcoin a major in college? Certainly not. But what would an exploration into Bitcoin look like? Well, Bitcoin is an example of what we refer to as decentralized finance. And if we were to explore decentralized finance, what we would find is decentralized finance would connect to academic majors at the collegiate level, like finance, economics, computer science, data and information science, even behavioral psychology, government, public policy, sociology, and international relations. If the student's not interested, after going through that conversation, we move on. If the student is intrigued, we move forward with directional ideas about how to start exploration. For example, we may suggest a summer program to provide more insight into whether the student's interest is in finance or in economics before identifying additional engagement ideas. Once the student has explored enough to identify that this general area, let's just say general finance, for example, once they've explored enough to identify that this general area is where he or she would like to spend their time and their energy exploring, it's time to start to investigate our end goals. We want to explore the prospective majors so that we have an understanding of the most strategic path to that end. Remember, in most cases, we will need to identify a prospective major to build the most competitive application for admission. But first, before we discuss how to consider the right prospective majors, it's important to note the distinction between a college and a university. At a university, there are often multiple colleges. Cornell, for example, has 7 different colleges. I tell you this because as we move forward, we will be talking about the importance of identifying the college at the university that the student plans to apply to, meaning that there is a strategy and there are consequences behind choosing one college over another at the same university. For example, in most instances, it's much harder to earn an offer from the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell than the College of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell. Just like it's much harder to get into NYU Stern than it is to get into NYU Arts and Sciences. Each college at the same university will have different levels of competitiveness and transferability. And since the major exists in the college, the prospective major choice impacts competitiveness of getting in and even the transferability once you get there. Let me give you an example. A student wants to apply to NYU Stern because she wants to study finance, but she learns that it's harder to get into NYU Stern than it is to get into NYU Arts and Sciences. So she wants to consider applying to NYU Arts and Sciences and then transferring. We call this an internal transfer, meaning if you go from one college at NYU to another college at NYU, we refer to that as an internal transfer because it's internal to the university. So she's thinking about an internal transfer from Arts and Sciences to Stern once she's been accepted using the easier route into the university, going the Arts and Sciences direction. Is this a good idea? No, it's very unlikely that she's going to be able to transfer from Stern to Arts and Sciences, as they take very few external or internal transfers. Thus, if you want to study in a real business program, this strategy would not make sense because she is likely to be locked out of a business college. Let me give you another example. A student wants to apply to NYU Arts and Sciences to study computer science, but she learns it is harder to get into NYU as a prospective computer science major than it is applying as a prospective sociology major. So she wants to consider focusing her application on her social science-centered experiences to get in, then declare computer science as her major. Is this a good idea? Probably yes. Of course, assuming she has sufficient social science-related experience and she puts that experience together in the right way without letting the university know she's actually interested in computer science. This would, in fact, be a strategic way to apply because sociology and computer science would be in the same College of Arts and Sciences. So identifying sociology at the outset and then going to computer science is not a problem. They exist in the same college. The 2 points I'm trying to make, and I know I'm hammering it home here, but it's so important. First, transferring amongst colleges at the same university, as noted, NYU and Arts and Sciences to NYU Stern, is not guaranteed and in some instances very unlikely. The second point, changing majors within the same college, as noted, sociology to computer science, that is very easy and very likely. Thus, when we are considering a prospective major, we need to consider 2 things. We want to make sure that we've identified the appropriate college so that the student has access to the major he or she ultimately wants, right? We don't want them stuck in a college that doesn't offer the major they want and they are not unable to transfer to the college they actually want. But assuming, part 2, that we have in fact identified the correct college, we want to consider the competitiveness of the prospective major. For example, computer science and pre-med are super hard compared to, say, a more social science focused area. If this all seems a bit too complicated, rest easy, at least initially. There are really only 3 typical paths to choose from. They are business, which encompasses things like accounting, economics, finance, management, and marketing. Then second one is engineering, things like bioengineering, civil engineering, electrical engineering, material science. And then arts and sciences, which is basically everything else. If you hope to apply as a prospective engineering or prospective business student, it is advised you make that decision very early. Since both colleges are rather specific, many of the best applicants will have very specific interests that translate to deep academic stories of investigation in these spaces. If we are being practical, evidence must be built before, say, 11th grade for a student to have a legitimate chance at elite schools in these specific areas. Since arts and sciences is by far the most broad college, I will focus much of the rest of this presentation on the college that offers everything from economics and computer science to biology, Greek literature, and the classics. So generally, within the College of Arts and Sciences, there are three main directions or three main areas from which to consider. And I've noted them on this slide in order of competition or bar of entry. The three areas are STEM, and as you'll note, there's a special note for the ultra high competitiveness of pre-med or computer science focused STEM students. The second one, the medium bar of entry, is your social sciences. And the third area, the lowest academic bar of entry, are your humanities. And under the requirements, you will note there are four elements of the application. They are motivation. An example of motivation would be, I took a course in Python over the summer, and that got me really interested in computer science. The second one is engagement. An example of engagement would be, I'm the founder of the encryption club at my high school. After I took that summer program, I became interested in computer science. I find encryption fascinating, so I was the founder of the encryption club. The third one is depth, right? So now I've started to explore computer science. Maybe the student is engaged in a research project that focuses on neomorphic computing structures, right? Now we've created a subsection under computer science that this student's interested in the computing structure, neomorphic computing structure, so we've created depth. And then the final one is objective achievement, right? So this would be like second place at Regeneron Science Fair. So please note that the asterisks next to the objective achievement and the coinciding asterisks next to pre-med and computer science, this indicates that for those areas at highly selective schools, objective achievement might be quite important. In less selective programs or at less selective universities, earning an offer may only require 3 or even 2 of the noted elements or requirements on this slide. Okay, guys, we're getting to the super important part of the presentation. If you're getting tired and you're dozing off, try to wake up for this slide. Academic fit is literally what this is all about. When people think about college admissions officers, they seem to think about them as gatekeepers. And in many instances, they act as gatekeepers. But up to 50% of many admissions officers' jobs is recruitment. The number one thing that people applying to highly selective colleges want to know about are the majors, right? Of course, they want to know about the programs they're going to apply to. And once a curious student decides he or she wants to study, say, particle physics, for example, the first thing those students do is learn more about the physics department. They want to know things like, will I have access to a particle accelerator? So in order to effectively recruit top-tier academic students, admissions officers must be versed in the unique qualities of the academic departments. And since the faculty know that it is in fact the admissions officer's job to recruit the best students for their departments, they meet with the admissions offices every single summer. Like the summers are spent faculty meeting with admissions officers. And the reason they do that is because admissions officers are expected to understand the slight differences between, relatively similar academic programs. And you see the quote on the slide. I remember this from one of my experiences. One of the faculty members said, basically, the reason we're meeting with you is so that you can do a better job of explaining to prospective students the amazing things our faculty are doing in these departments. And what happens is that translates that conversation between a faculty member and the admissions officer about their specific department, that translates into a hyper focus on academic fit, especially for your underserved academic departments. The admissions officers remember those conversations, right? They happen every year. And when they read the applications, they're looking to see, is this student going to provide what the faculty member indicated is what this department is all about? The applicant's job is to illustrate through the academic and extracurricular engagement that they are uniquely qualified to make a likely contribution to that specific academic department. If we can assume for a moment that the applicant has successfully identified an area of legitimate interest, we might want to peek ahead to get some ideas about how we can build an application that will illustrate exactly the focus and qualities that are valued. For the parents in the audience, imagine you are applying for a job. The first thing you do is review the position description. You do this so that you can understand the position needs and identify your experiences that provide evidence that you can meet those needs. It would be very difficult to position yourself well for that job if you never looked at the position description or never had an understanding of what the position demanded. In this instance, we're basically doing the same thing, but instead of applying for a job, we're applying to college. And instead of reviewing a position description, we're reviewing the academic departments the student may apply to in the future. For example, if you were working with me or my team and you noted your interest in, say, government or public policy, we would review those programs at a wide variety of schools to get a sense of the different focuses at the different departments. And we might eventually land on a more unique option, like, say, the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell, which dives into things like how policy impacts the workforce. In this case, we would first take a look at the types of questions we might have to answer in the future, right? So those are your supplemental essay questions. And as noted, they're pretty much all asking the same thing. What do you want to study? Why do you want to study it? And how have you explored it? Next, we would want to try to explore the why do you want to study it here aspect of the question. And what we want to do in order to do that is we want to identify the key aspects of the college. In this case, it's work, employment, and labor. You would be amazed how many very smart, intelligent students develop very poor applications to ILR specifically, this college, because they never really orient themselves with what the school is actually all about. Then we try to understand how the students and the faculty in the programs are actually learning more about the area, meaning we want to understand what types of faculty, courses, research, organizations, etc. exist to help the faculty members and the students develop a better understanding of the area of academia. And finally, we want to develop a plan that provides for multiple opportunities throughout high school to spend time and energy engaging in activities that serve as evidence of logical investigation into that area of academia. Back to the parents for a moment. It's like peeking at the position description of the job you want and then making sure you volunteer for all of the assignments that would prepare you to fit the needs of that position. Okay, once we've identified an area of academic interest and we've identified the types of departments we will eventually be trying to make the case that we can contribute to, we are ready to begin building our evidence. First, we need to build the engagement foundation. This is very important. Even if you think your high school has really terrible clubs and organizations, or you feel that you have way more exciting things to do outside of school, you still need to be in at least a few in-school clubs and organizations. This is considered foundational engagement. Schools want to know whether you will take advantage of the resources that are in front of you. And the only way we know that is if we see you take advantage of the resources available to you in your high school. And some of those resources are clubs and organizations. If for some reason you feel that those clubs and organizations really are of not much value, then I would argue that part of your job is to help improve those clubs and organizations so that you can make a long-lasting impact on that community. After that, it's all about building and layering experiences. Let me give you an example of layering experiences. For this example, we'll assume that the student's interested in political science or public policy. At first, the student might get involved in, say, student government at their high school, foundational engagement. And then they might engage in a government program in Washington, D.C. during the summer. Since the student is in fact a student, right, in the educational system, maybe they became interested in the public policy behind the public school system. And in an effort to learn more, the student decides to explore, and I had a student do this last year, the efficacy of the remedial summer programs in his or her local school district. Those findings could then be presented at a local school board meeting. Then the student might engage in a faculty mentor-led research project that compares and contrasts the best and worst practices of remedial programs in his or her state. Those findings could be published in a local newspaper or in an academic journal. This student has connected the experiences, created layered depth by exploring through a variety of platforms, and illustrated the ability to consider questions from an academic and community application-based perspective. The benefit of this type of evidence building is that it will serve as the foundation of your academic narrative. And it will highlight the qualities of curiosity, self-motivation, independence, creativity, problem solving, persistence, etc. These qualities, demonstrated through varied exploration of an area of interest, these qualities will help you earn offers of admission. Okay. The student has built the foundation of engagement by joining clubs and doing things outside of school. The student has created depth by developing a research topic. Let's now fast forward to the application time. Why are we doing all of this? The first thing we do, my team does with every single client, is we engage in an academic narrative review. An academic narrative is essentially all of the things the student has done that supports their application direction. I believe this is absolutely essential. And as you can see, we start in 9th grade and we identify the motivations and focuses of each experience to build the overall application direction. Each part of the journey provides an element of the application story. Our job is to identify all of our possible evidence pieces so that we can use our content in the best way possible. For example, in this slide noted, Susie Q volunteered at the Nehemiah Center in 9th grade, highlighted in blue. And since this center works with underprivileged kids, it fits the academic narrative that this student is telling. So it gets added to this specific academic narrative. What we then do is we connect each experience to the next experience so that we understand how the student explored the area of interest across a variety of time and different experiences. Then we go through the exercise of identifying what I refer to as associated words, as highlighted in blue on the slide. In this instance, we note the experiences, this specific experience connects to words like education, policy, equity, charitable foundations. We will use these words and the associated experiences later to connect to the words we find when we engage in the exploration of the specific academic departments. Once we have built our evidence, created our academic narrative, we are ready to begin the application process. If the student has been thinking about this stuff for a while now, they probably should know exactly what programs they are applying to well before it's time to apply. If the student has not been thinking about this in advance, it is important that they consider the universe of possible academic fits through the review of the academic narrative that we just mentioned. For example, imagine the student wants to go to medical school and thus wants to apply pre-med. Side note, this is a very bad idea. You never note pre-med on your application, but that is a story for another day. We can talk about that later. Nonetheless, as an interested pre-med student, the student decides they're interested in Cornell University. Which college at Cornell might fit for someone who wants to follow the pre-med path? Well, there are literally 3 separate colleges, all with their own culture and focus, that could offer the path to medical school, including Arts and Sciences, the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and the College of Human Ecology. If we focus only on the College of Arts and Sciences for just a moment, there are 6 different prospective majors for the pre-med health-focused applicant in the College of Arts and Sciences alone. If you add in the other two colleges, the options for a pre-med student can be overwhelming. Further, each program has differing competitiveness, so choosing the wrong one does have consequences. And this is only one university. If a student is applying to 5 or 10 universities, there can be a large variety of possibilities to strategically consider. So how do you actually know how to decide the right or the most strategic prospective major path for the application? My team engages in what I refer to as prospective major research. If you recall Susie Q from the academic narrative, we're now going to take that same academic narrative and we're going to ask ourselves, how will the evidence of this narrative illustrate how I can contribute to one of the majors or one of the minors at this specific college? In the example above, we've identified at least 5 different programs that Susie Q could provide evidence for. Each program is evaluated, and we consider whether each option could benefit the student's application story or overall application competitiveness. After a thorough review, one or multiple programs are selected as providing the best combination of strategic advantage and the student's future goals. Okay, guys, we're finally here. This is literally all for this, the supplemental essay. This is the question or questions that the dean or director literally wrote themselves, specifically hoping to evoke a response that provides insight into whether this applicant will contribute something of value to this community. But you are ready for this moment because you have already prepared your academic narrative. You have all the details necessary for a deep and specific academic narrative that translates into a deep and specific academic application for college. You've identified your end goal, right? Meaning you've already engaged in your prospective major research, and you've identified and focused on the activity and the departments that provide the best match, meaning your experiences and the opportunities at the institution, you've identified those. With those essential pieces of information, you're ready to build an awesome supplemental essay. So how do we begin to prepare for the most important part of this application? The steps are as follows. Number 1, review your academic narrative. All of the things that you did that are commonly connected from 9th to now, be familiar with it. Part 2, review the universe of possible academic departments based on your academic narrative, right? You're saying, here's all the things I did, here are all the different majors that I could possibly apply to and illustrate that I've explored in some way. And then part 3, identify the best matches between your experiences and the academic departments. That's literally it. All of the work that you did to this moment is to prepare you for these types of essays so that you can use your varied and deep experiences to tell the school what you will add to their academic community. As a side note, in my experience, some of you might be wondering, can't you just apply as an undecided student? Why do I even have to identify this prospective major? Real quick, there are 2 different types of undecided students. The desirable undecided student sounds something like this. I love space. One of the things I'm fascinated by is whether life can be sustained in space. To that end, I'm engaging in a research project that would explore whether the mRNA vaccine would be effective in space. In order to answer questions like this, I feel the need to have an understanding of chemical engineering, biomedical engineering, and aerospace engineering. Most of my project work integrates some aspects of these areas, but at this time, I'm undecided which of those areas will be my focus. This type of undecided student can be a highly sought after applicant, but this is sometimes a more complex route. I always suggest we build one academic foundation to start, and then we consider the interdisciplinary narrative opportunities. The second type of undecided student sounds something like this, and this is significantly more common. I like STEM related stuff. My grades are pretty good in STEM areas. Math comes easy to me and science is cool. My parents want me to be a doctor, but I don't know. I'll probably do something in STEM. I'm not saying that's what they write in their essays, but fundamentally that's what's going on in their heads. And these students, even with very strong grades and test scores, these students are often waitlisted. The following is an example of what we are trying to accomplish. In the end, we are trying to illustrate that the applicant's experience provides both context for academic interest and a likelihood of future contribution in this academic space. So I'm going to read this and note what is important about each part of this sample paragraph. Of course, I'm pretending to be the applicant as I write this, and the details of this paragraph, just to be clear, are incorrect. They were changed purposefully, so it would not be smart to just kind of copy this, but it makes the point. In 2020, I wrote an article entitled X that explored the funding gap between white and non-white school districts in X district. So as the applicant, in one sentence, I've immediately identified the experience I have that I want to connect to the institution. In the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania, I hope to take Dr. Jamila Meichner's course titled Politics of Public Policy in the United States to learn more about how to navigate the sociological and economic complexities in making changes to educational policy. Now, it's important to note that we did identify a course, right? Politics of Public Policy in the United States. But the verbiage that comes after that course to learn more about how to navigate, that is from the course description, but certainly it's not copy and pasted from this course description, right? You need to interpret the course description in order to connect it to your experience. Moving on, Dr. Meichner's 2018 article entitled Gentrification of whatever that was opened my eyes to the cultural sensitivities behind equity and access through her XYZ analysis. Now, what's important about this sentence? Imagine there's no way you could possibly write that sentence if you had not read her article, because you would not be able to identify what opened your eyes to the cultural sensitivities as it relates to her analysis, right? So you can't just take research and throw it into a supplemental essay. You need to be aware of what the research is about and be able to connect that back to your own experience. After engaging in a variety of investigative journalism experiences in high school, right? So this student had written a bunch of articles, and as you see, I wrote links in the application because you would want to provide that evidence. I hope to explore the paradoxes of policymaking issues in more depth at Penn. I hope to contribute to the Crime, Prison, Education, and Justice Program, NCAS, and here's by far the most important part of this paragraph, by further expanding on Dr. Meichner's exploration into the unwanted synergies between crime and education. The key part of this is that we've illustrated a future forward-looking perspective of how the student might contribute, might expand, might progress on the work that's being done at the college already. Now, of course, in a real paragraph, in a real supplemental essay, we would expand on that. We wouldn't just kind of jump around, but the paragraph makes the point. We're trying to connect student experience to the opportunity. And when I say opportunity, to be clear, that's what this is, right? The colleges are not, you're not getting something from them. At least that's not the way you should discuss it in your application. The colleges and universities are providing you an opportunity, right? And your experience provides you the foundation you need to take advantage of that opportunity. And the opportunity is to contribute to a really exciting, dynamic community. In the end, and I know most of you already know this, good grades and good test scores just are not enough. This is the result of not having a plan. Bright but standard, familiar profile. You know, this student right here in this specific graphic very easily could have 1,600 and perfect scores in the most rigorous curriculum. It still would be bright but standard, familiar profile, because we're not identifying how the student is going to be contributing to this specific community. As noted, there are in fact spaces to be won at the top colleges based on academic ability, right? At Harvard, we know that 17% of the spaces are being lost because we have not identified extracurricular activities that illustrate the personal qualities that are valued. Our job is to give the admissions officers the non-standard, the unfamiliar, the depth, the specific. With a clear strategy and plan, in all honesty, it really isn't as hard as you might think. Before we finish up and I take questions, I want to take a moment to provide a bit of insight into our process and into our work. First, the plan. I know it says 7th through 11th. Of course, I really believe starting early is fundamentally important here. Why is that? Just imagine for a moment you have two students, they're exactly the same academically, same test score, same grades, same ability. One student decided in 11th grade what he or she wanted to do at the collegiate level. One student decided in 9th grade. It would be almost impossible for the 11th grader to build as much evidence as the 9th grader. That doesn't mean that all 9th graders, as you noted, I have 7th grade, right? That doesn't mean everyone's ready. But in the end, starting to have these conversations about why making some choices, not life-defining choices, but choices about the way you apply to college earlier rather than later, having those conversations is really important. And starting earlier, from what I have found, is the best way to ensure you build a deep, specific academic narrative that layers engagement. The plan focuses generally on 5 specific key areas. Curriculum and rigor. We want to ensure that the curriculum and rigor is appropriate based on academic direction. This is an area, as noted, that an admissions officer can simply glance at a transcript, glance at the academic direction, and identify an inconsistency and move on and come to the conclusion that this is not the right student applying to the right program. Then tests. College admissions, it's funny, with coronavirus, have offered way more options as it relates to testing. Right now we have test blind and test optional policies. And I think if you would ask the administrators at the colleges, they think that they're providing more access and it's easier. But I would argue that you need more strategy than ever, especially as an Asian student applying to these schools, about whether or not you should be submitting tests to optional schools is really important. And it's a complex conversation depending on the area you're going into and the school you're applying to. So we focus on making sure that we make the right decision there. Then your in-school extracurricular activities, as noted, this is about building the foundation of engagement and contribution. Then out-of-school extracurricular activities, this is about layered but focused out-of-school engagement. And then finally, engaging in your community. This is self-directed, academically considered community engagement. That means you don't just go to a random, nursing home or soup kitchen. We think about the direction of your application interest, and we think about how you can engage in your community in a meaningful way that somehow is connected to that area of interest. The next part is the college list. Benchmarking the college list is very complex. It requires an in-depth understanding of the interplay between statistics and stories. And if you really want to provide yourself the best chance of earning a top-tier offer, you have to accurately assess your chances and your overall risk profile. I would argue that there are not many people, your guidance counselors included, that really have a good understanding, especially outside of early decision, of the likelihood of a student getting in, especially in regular decision rounds. The college list, one of the biggest mistakes I see is students not understanding the risks they're taking and being in a difficult position thereafter because they incorrectly benchmarked their college list. The third part is application strategy. It's interesting how you apply to college, ED1, ED2, early action, restrictive early action, regular decision, or rolling admission may literally be the most important decision you make. In order to make a strategic application, in order to develop a strategic application strategy, you need to accurately benchmark your list. And the only way you can do that is to overlay that with the application options, ED1, ED2, EA, because they're all different. Let me give you a quick look. I noted Northwestern on the slide because I had just been working with one of my clients that's applying to Northwestern. And they said to me, you know what, John, I love Northwestern. I just don't think I want to commit. I'm just not ready. There are so many amazing schools out there. I don't think I can make this commitment. And so I said to them, okay, let's just go through the stats and I'll let you come to your own decision about whether you want to commit. So here are the numbers. Northwestern gets, last year got 39,263 applications for admission. And of those, 4,411 of them were early decision. So about 11% of their applicant pool applied early decision. That means that 89% of their applicant pool applied outside of early decision. From that 11%, right, 4,400 applications out of 40,000, out of 4,400 applications, they got ED, they filled 58% of all of their spaces with just those 4,400 people. So what happens is by the time you get to regular decision, right, We now have, in theory, 89% of the rest of the applicants fighting for 40% of the spaces, when 11% of the applicants are fighting for 58% of the spaces. I think that makes the point of just how engaged in the ED process colleges are. They would love to fill all of their class ED because it lowers their acceptance rates. If you drill in even further and you say, okay, I see there are 1,105 students who are enrolled from the ED round in a freshman class. If you dove in and you said, who are these people? Who are these 1,100 people? What you'll find is they're almost exclusively white, Indian, or Asian. You don't find many underrepresented minorities, Black and Hispanic, in an early decision round. And on top of that, if you overlay socioeconomic status, almost everybody who applied ED is in the upper levels of socioeconomic status, because nobody's committing to paying $50,000 a year before they ever see a financial aid package unless they feel that they can afford it, which means that every single one, for the most part, of the 1,100 students admitted at Northwestern in the ED round were either white, Indian, or Asian and come from a high income background. Now imagine for a moment that you are the admissions director. You just finished your ED round, you're happy, you just filled 58% of your class, you're about to go to the RD round. What would you do, right? You would look at what you just did, right? You'd go back to your ED round and say, I'm just wondering, amongst all the priorities of the types of students I'm supposed to be bringing in, how many do I already have? So that I can inform the types of students I'm going to be taking in the regular decision round. So what happens is they look back, they say, oh, we took a bunch of Indian, Asian, and white students, and they're all high income. We need the opposite of that now in regular decision. So quite frankly, regardless of how smart you are, it doesn't matter if you're Harvard level material, Northwestern doesn't want you in the RD round, they want you in the ED round. And if you don't apply ED, you're putting yourself in a very, very difficult position. You might get in, but you are not going to get into many schools with low acceptance rates in RD rounds, regardless of how intelligent you are. So it's really important that you benchmark this, you understand these statistics, and that before you say, I'm going to apply to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, or MIT, which are the 5 schools in the country that do not offer early decision, that you understand the benefits of ED and the risk you take if you forego ED. After we have built the plan with the associated evidence, appropriately benchmarked the college list, and strategically chose the application options, we are ready to move on to step 4, which is developing the application story. Here we use all of your experiences and all of our insight to build an application for admission that gives you the best chance of earning an offer. And we offer basically A to Z consulting, where we do everything from helping to brainstorm to, of course, editing the content of the final parts of the application. I'll leave you with just a few final thoughts before we jump into the Q&A session. Colleges do not want well-rounded students. They seek a well-rounded class. There is a significant difference. That means universities often seek to admit great physics students, great violinists, great historians, great computer scientists. Together, they create a great, well-rounded class. Your job is to be a piece of that puzzle, because the individually well-rounded students are often on the outside looking in. You have to understand that you are not just competing with the kids in your school or even the kids in your state. You're competing with students around the world. Success requires vision. Success requires a plan. Do you have a vision of what you need to accomplish? Do you understand how to enact that vision? Do you understand how to illustrate the evidence of that journey? It's not just 4 years. The networking value at an elite institution truly lasts a lifetime and provides significant social and